reverse order from where we were before. So, Maud, do you want to kick off?
Yep, yeah, makes sense. So we don't have a policy. As such, I think it is very linked to the scale up and tech part of the business. What we have though is guidance for managers. So we reckon that I don't think I know what people should work and where do they work best. I think I have an idea. But it's per team. I think if I do see a developer and a product manager, I think I would struggle to see how they work best. So what we have done with the HR team, so we're quite linked on that one. I'm not part of the HR team. I am actually reporting the CFO. But with the HR team, what we've done is we've actually let a guidance for manager to understand what is their goal. They should know. Once they kind of get their goal, then they would know how to achieve this goal. If it's a sales team and they have lots of young people coming in to join the team, they probably need that sort of mentorship, almost like shadowing that you would see. So they're probably likely to ask them to be 3 days in the office per week. But then again, each team kind of has to define their own. And we obviously then provide the best place we can when they are coming in. But we kind of push this back on manager with a good chunk of guidance.
That's great. Thanks, Maud. Appreciate it. Katelyn, same question. Have you got a stance on remote working, hybrid working, and can you share what that is with us, with our audience?
Yeah, so Indeed is pretty flexible right now. We don't have a policy or mandate outside of sales and CS. So our sales and CS functions are required to come into the office 2 days per week. And so that is a formal return to office policy. But outside of that, each functional leader gets to determine how they're approaching hybrid. And we're still definitely going through a learning phase on that. We've had a lot of conversations around this idea of one size does not fit all approach. I think every company is looking at hybrid in a different lens, but that also is ranging in terms of region, right? Different regions and impact to employees is different. And then each function, right, too. And I think just speaking to what Maud said about managers, I think even if a functional leader has a hybrid approach, each manager within that function is also thinking about hybrid in a different way. So Indeed is pretty flexible right now. I think we're still going through the learning phase of what hybrid means to us specifically.
That's great. And what you said about one size does not fit all 100% resonates with what we hear from many clients right now. Thanks very much, Katelyn. And Georgina.
Quite different for us, and it is a bit of a challenging topic. So because we are part of the civil service, there is a mandated 60% attendance that has been applied across all government departments. In reality for GPA, it's a little bit different. We're relatively small. There's only about 400 staff, and we have a mixture of contracts and offices dotted around the country. We're also very mobile. So for us, it's very different. But our departments that we're delivering for, they are mandated that 60%, so the 3 days in the office. And it wouldn't be inappropriate for me to say that has been causing huge issues to sort of have a blanket range across so many diverse and different departments delivering different outputs. And we're definitely still working through that. And as GPA, trying to manage that, where we have hubs with multiple different departments and different needs, the impact on space and design is quite complex when we might have different departments occupying space for certain less or more time. So for us, it still hasn't particularly settled and is quite difficult as we're working through projects, particularly in the early stages, but when we have got a mandate from government into what we should be doing.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that, Georgina. And I guess just to throw out an open question, will it ever settle for any company? I think it's always going to be an evolution, an evolving picture, depending on so many different factors. And this was something we were discussing recently around the whole concept of uniqueness at scale. You're dealing with a group of workers, of employees, of associates, maybe hundreds, maybe thousands of them, each with their own different personalities, styles, work modes, and then you're dealing with different organizations, maybe different sub brands or subgroups within those organizations. You're dealing with different tasks all those people may be doing. So there's a whole variety of different factors that affect the kind of unique application, but within what's effectively a pretty fixed workplace environment. You know, the workplace it has elements of flexibility, but it's relatively static. It's designed to last 5 years, 7 years, you know, different number for whoever you talk to, and kind of trying to create that or overlay that flexibility within a static environment is an interesting challenge that I think we'll continue to talk about. So as we dive in, I'd love to invite the audience to please use the chat box or the Q&A box on Zoom, or if you're on Insights Live, sorry, on LinkedIn Live, use the chat box there. We want to invite your participation. These panelists are experts with huge experience, and we want to make sure that we're able to kind of share and respond to the questions that are front of mind for our audience as well. But maybe if we just kind of kick off the discussion with a bit of a high level question around, I guess when we're thinking early stages in a project, would love to know kind of your thoughts around those initial planning challenges, particularly when we're thinking of the differing needs of the differing stakeholders within a project. So you've got a wide variety of maybe users of that space or people who are interested in that space, right the way from individual users that are going to occupy the space through to maybe financial aspects, through to facilities, through to sustainability, through to, you know, many different aspects. So kind of setting that vision, maybe selling that vision, and then kind of how you bring together those different stakeholder angles. And I know, Georgina, we had a chat yesterday, didn't we, in our call, and you've got some great experience to share. Perhaps you could kick off.
Yeah, happy to. So for me, I think a big question is, who is the client that you're actually designing for? From my experience, I will be referred to as the client. As a design manager on the project, GPA will be paying the fees of our architects, interior designers. So I will assume that role as the client. Depending on which department that we're delivering for, they will be my client, and there will be a representative in there or a team of representatives that maybe have some property or design experience, but may not. So we'll have to adapt to that level of technical knowledge, whether they do or not, and how we sort of develop up the stakeholder mapping for it. But a big thing for me that's been coming out is, although I might originally see that as our client, there's that end user client can have a very big disconnect to the people that are actually sitting at the table very early on in a project. And this may be because we're working on projects that run for many years. And to just get end user clients sitting at the table on particularly really large projects, I'm thinking some of ours are, 5,000 people in a building, to try and get that voice and representation through to what the requirements are, and to also commit a number of years before the project's going to be delivered, is very difficult and daunting. Particularly for people who sitting in design meetings is not normal for them and really out of their comfort zone. So I think, identifying the client and drilling into stakeholder mapping. You might think you've got your client, but just spending a bit more time going into it further and looking at that sort of secondary client that might sit beyond that. So just really valuable groups there might be. For us, it's faith networks or disability networks or places where we can take the design to and just get other perspectives on it. Really helps, I would say.
That's great. And I think we'll come back to some of those kind of employee resource groups or network groups in a moment or two. But Katelyn, glad of your views. You know, you've just been through a fairly substantial project, haven't you, in Austin? So you could probably share some recent experiences around that whole journey of stakeholder engagement, feedback, and then how that's transpired through the project.
Yeah, I will just say some lessons learned. I won't drill into the whole process. I will say something that we are changing through our design process and coming out of COVID. Prior to COVID, we just programmed or had conversations with senior leadership and aligned the project goals at a senior leadership level. I think coming out of COVID and the financial constraints too that everyone is feeling right now, optimization being a big focus, we're having to align leadership sentiment with an additional layer of doesn't make budgetary sense as well. So something that we're doing coming out of this is, you know, the senior leadership was disconnected from individuals as a boots on the ground means for 2+ years, right? And as everyone said, we're kind of still learning what this hybrid approach looks like for us. So we are starting to have more local individual contributor conversations through focus groups, through surveys, and presenting that data back to senior leadership through our programming efforts to say, here's what employees are telling us that they need to work efficiently. So that's been a big change for us is being more prepared with data to share with leadership to help guide their strategy, which further helps us align our project goals.
That's great. Yeah, data, huge topic, and availability of data, and then the ability to interpret what the data tells you or maybe doesn't tell you. Very interesting, probably subtopic that we could spend a lot of time on. Maud, could you share some experiences around that kind of stakeholder alignment and the journey through a project?
I don't think it's too dissimilar from what Katelyn and Georgina said. I think again, I feel privileged to be an in-house kind of person, workplace, and I would say budget is always on a topic, so I will park budget as somewhere there. But I would say what I normally use is kind of 4 steps. It does start. Nobody comes to you as the workplace team and say, I need something if nothing has changed before, right? So I would say for me, and I know this is a bit different from Georgina, that have maybe little pockets in one building, it would come for me as the real estate part. So I would start with an analysis of the real estate portfolio. When is my next lease coming up? When is the likelihood I'm going to have to change, have to stay, downgrade, upgrade? That's my first piece of like, you know, how to start the project. I know it sounds really early, but it's like, why has made you change? And I think like Katelyn said, it is a long-term business as well. So usually all of the leases are going to be 10 years with maybe, if you're lucky, a bit of a break clause in 5, right? So it's a big kind of looking at the audit of the real estate portfolio. Like Katelyn said, and Georgina, you said it as well, we will look at what employee wants. I know it sounds like common sense. And yes, they might feel a bit like annoyed to have written and answer 50,000 surveys after COVID, but it's still important to know what they want. I would say we tend to do less of surveys now, and we do with the teams, so the workplace team in each offices across the world, they would do the customer journey mapping. So literally, like in the retail business, we would do what each department, what each kind of persona needs. If it's a new joiner, if it's a visitor, if it's a GWIR, which is our employees, then we kind of map out what they need, what they want. It does change. So we do an annual kind of customer journey. Every time you see a gap, that would create what you need to do in the budget, right? With the budget, it will create the project. Okay, you know, we just got a new product that has been launched. We need to showcase this to a lot of clients. We would love to attract more clients. Who doesn't? Okay, let's create like another space in our current space in London, a big opening for clients. Let's do something crazy where they can have a talk about a product. Or so you kind of always come with like a realization of what do I have as the real estate, then a bit of what employee wants, but I would say survey, always good. And then a bit of like your workplace team, what do they know about it? And then finally, and I think I'm sure some people mention it, and we all know this, you still need to have the blessing of the leadership, right? So you do need to have the visioning session. What's funny is not only they tend to disagree or be far away from the employees, but they tend to disagree suddenly within each other, right? Marketing will want something, finance will want something. So it's interesting because usually on the session of visioning, you kind of have to kind of reshape and say, well, actually, this is the goal or the mission that you have put in the big lines of the brochure of who we are as GWI. So should we just carry on with this, right? Or the strategy of the company for the next 3 years is mass adoption, client retention. So let's kind of focus on this. And that's how I would sell then the project. So after I do all of kind of those categories, I kind of then sell the project to say, well, we do have a gap considering you have a lease expiring, what employee wants, we have said it, maybe more spaces, or they really can't have those client meetings in those really terrible meeting room right now. We need something better. I mean, I'm looking at the Palisade behind you, Alex, like we need this. We need something like super cool to kind of make them come into our space. And then after that, this is how I think it would become a bit of a no-brainer. The budget would come, it would say, okay, how much that would cost, but the no-brainer should have ticked this at this point from a leadership perspective. When they see that there's a no-brainer that we need to do something, then we talk budget. Then we talk budget.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I guess what's kind of emerging from what you've all said is it's a pretty complex landscape that you're trying to manage here. You've got different stakeholders, senior versus people, employees who are kind of on the ground using the space. And then you've got a long project timeline where things also may evolve. You know, we won't mention the C word, but there might be a global pandemic right in the middle of your project, which suddenly changes a huge amount of things that the project may have been originally designed for, and then maybe perhaps that landscape needs to change. One thing I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts around is kind of retaining that initial vision. Maybe you have some initial surveys or workshops or whatever, but kind of retaining that initial vision as you go through. I think, Georgina, you mentioned some of your projects might be 2, 3, 4, 5 years. Kind of holding on to that. Love to hear your thoughts around that.
Yeah, I think obviously it is easier on shorter projects because you don't get as much of the churn. But a project that I'm just finishing, and the building's just recently opened in South London. I actually worked on that project back in 2020, before I went off on maternity leave. When I came back, it was still going, and then still had another year to run on it. And some of the people were the same, but in that time there'd been so much churn. There was actually nobody from the original project team who did the inception and the all the initial designs and the visuals, and it just wasn't there. And you definitely sense that dilutes as you run through the different RIBA stages, if we're talking about UK projects. And sometimes the length of time is really, really tricky, and that retained knowledge that people just hold in their brains, like how do we get that out of them, or the really like little nugget conversations that someone had in a workshop that just wasn't recorded. So we will try and more formally record things and do handovers. But I don't think that is an easy thing, because naturally when maybe people be leaving a business or going off on maternity leave, they pass on the essential bits, the bits people need to know just to get the job done or the project finished. You don't have time or the capacity to hand on all those little nuggets of information that really add like the value to the project. So I think for me, when I think about longer projects, and if I was going to do it in the future, I wouldn't just have the key sign-offs at the end of an RIBA stage 2 or a 3 when we're getting into technical design. I think if I'm looking at a stage that could be a year or longer, we need to do more client engagement in it, and it's harder and it's more work. But I think when we need to do it, we need to be checking in, and I think keeping that sponsorship of the vision. For us, even we've had a change of CEO in that time on a project. How can we just ask the leadership to keep involved? There is so much going on. Sort of once the projects are in flight and they're ticking over, I think they can sort of get pushed to the back of the mind. They're just getting delivered now. They're getting rolled out. That's fine. But I think just keeping it on the agenda. Keep talking about it, getting the leadership back in the room, not wait until they're just cutting the ribbon at the end, but actually coming in at the stages and talking about it again and doing a bit more effort and engagement on it, I think will help, and something we need to do a bit more on our longer projects, definitely.
Yeah, that's great. Any thoughts on that, Katelyn, kind of how you've kind of retained that initial vision or spark of what the project's intended to do, and maybe and then right way down to the fine detail of this is how people will engage with the real estate?
So, for the Austin campus project that we just completed, where we had to pause because of the C word and then kind of restart design over again, the biggest challenge that we were faced with, and this was a great question from our leadership, is how do you want me to sign off on a design when I have no idea how people are going to utilize the space? And initially our return to office was going to be about a year earlier than what it was supposed to be. So we were like, great, we'll get data, we'll help inform this. But as our RTO kept shifting, we were realizing, okay, we can't delay this project any further. Like, we have lease implications for delaying this project. We're going to have to make some decisions. So how can we inform leadership to the greatest of our capability? And the way that we did that was through kind of pushing the boundaries of hard wall construction and doing demountable wall partitions. So we redesigned the building with 70% demountable wall partitions, with the concept that as we get sensor data, sentiment data, we would be able to adapt and change the walls through a CapEx project. We made it very clear that this was not something that the end users could do or facilities could do. This would be a construction capital improvement project. But that was a great way for us to kind of show to leadership and really started shifting our mindset that we need to start thinking about fixed static construction and start thinking about how can we adapt to the future. And I'm going to go off on a tangent, Alex. You said I could.
Do it.
I think something that we're also closely watching now is someone put in the chat, like, what trends are you seeing in terms of spaces? What feedback are you getting from employees? What we're getting now, to your point, Alex, that you made earlier, is not what we're going to probably see a year, 2 year, 5 year, 10 years from now. And a huge component to that is going to be generational changes. We already have data showing that Gen Z want more in-office time, connection, training, education. Spaces that meet that look very different than our employee base that's in the office today, that are saying we want more enclosed spaces, we want more individual spaces, we want smaller 2 to 3 person spaces, less larger training room spaces. So for Indeed, our spaces were traditionally built out in an open floor setting. All of our workstations were in an open floor, no offices. It was either workstations or conference rooms. And so we're now starting to adapt our spaces to build in more phone rooms, more focus rooms, which are different. And I can chat through that if anyone's interested. I won't bore anyone if no one's interested. Removing workstations to be able to add in those enclosed space types. But that does become hard, especially for sales and CS offices where we have a 1-to-1 desk ratio. And we can't give on that workstation count. They have to have workstations per their RTO policy. So being able to bring modularity into those workstation areas to help give them those enclosed spaces is where we're kind of focusing efforts.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've heard it from probably 4 or 5 clients in the last 2 or 3 weeks that we heard a lot of clients talking about de-densifying their spaces. So kind of what you were saying, bringing maybe pulling out traditional workstations or open plan bench desks and replacing those with collaboration or individual, particularly phone booth or deep focus type spaces. But I'm hearing from a few clients recently saying we're actually re-densifying, we're actually increasing the number of workstations because of this kind of human need, I guess, for a bit of my own space, which often translates to my own workstation. I'm interested to hear more, Georgina, kind of your thoughts around what the question was, what trends are you seeing in terms of the spaces you're providing? What feedback are you getting from employees? Any kind of high level thoughts around the types of spaces that employees are looking for?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because at the moment I think the workplace people, the FM people, the global real estate people, suddenly we have become like this crystal ball of what work would be, and I'm always interested to be like, yes, what would it be? I'm not sure either. But we can see some trends. I think, like Katelyn said, I think, if something is coming up and you're on a massive project, I think, Georgina, you mentioned it as well on your project, it is very difficult. We still have to have that phase, very agile still on that concept of we're going to give it a go. We're going to give it a go and kind of see if it works. So at the moment, I feel like everybody else, what we've done is give it a go as kind of take off a lot of the desks. COVID didn't help, so people wanted a lot more space in between. So we kind of did a lot more desk. I think our ratio is 1 to 3. I was searching in my head. So it's 1 to 3 across the world roughly, except Singapore, which is 1 to 1. probably more a cultural thing. And what we've done, I think, is we try to put as much collaboration spaces as we could, palissade, some nice kind of portals, big portals for 4, 6 people, and some kind of campfire kind of design. And where we thought, people are going to come back and wants to chat to each other and collaborate. And I think they did. And this is where we did neighborhoods, and you want to make sure when you come back, your team is here. This is amazing. And then I think now, it's been 2 years where, okay, the neighborhoods, they're getting a bit tired. I think if you really look at people, they actually just want to they just want to make the job they just want to make the job go. And so the focus is almost, I would say, as a trend, almost passing the collaboration points. So I'm not sure if we're going to put lots of more benches, but what we've seen is a lot more of those, I dare I say, old school, not cubicles, but kind of like desks that are a bit on their own, or maybe like a star kind of shape where you do have a real space and you don't have necessarily somebody right opposite of you. And then next to them, you will have a space that you could connect. So actually the trend at the moment is to have some focus space that are focus space, not just a bank of desks where you just sit and you kind of hear, Alex chatting on a client, which is brilliant, and that sounds fun, but I just want to make my Excel sheets. And I think this is kind of what we've seen at the moment and what we are trying to provide. What happened though is we tend to need a lot of meter square for this, a square foot, So if you're lucky enough to have this kind of possibility from a real estate point of view, from your lease, or even from a budget point of view, great. If you don't, I think this is where the design has to really be clever. This is where you need to have your architect, space store coming in, look at the space. What can we do? Something that you can readjust because technically in an ideal scenario world, and rainbows everywhere, you'll have a lot of space where you can create both, right? You will have those great space when you can immerse yourself into your Excel documents you need to crack on, a Google Doc. And then after that, then you just want a great coffee somewhere funky. And then after that, you just have your meeting room. In an ideal world, you will have everything. If you don't have that, this is where that kind of agile space would probably be best.
So creating choice seems to be a front of mind topic with a lot of clients.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, Alex. I think the biggest thing that we're hearing from employees is that they just want choice. And I think, to Maud's point, that's hard to predict how that will change and evolve. And so being able to adapt the space again, based on data and sentiment changes, giving us that flexibility to change the space, and even leadership sentiment, right? Like, if Indeed's policy changed, or we don't know, right? Like what's going to happen. So giving us the greatest capability possible to be able to adapt and conform to the environment that we're given. Someone put in chat, does the panel think hybrid's here to stay, or will the bubble burst? In my opinion, I do think hybrid is here to stay. I think now that people have gotten the taste of being able to work from home, it's not for everybody. I definitely, again, think that there are individuals, regions that working remotely does not work for them. But I do think that companies will be required to allow their employees to work from home in some sort of cadence, whatever that may look like. I do think that the office will continue to be a hub and drive of culture. And so how can we continue to serve, that as well? Yeah.
Thanks, Katelyn. Georgina, any thoughts?
The trends are probably a little bit different in some way, but definitely the same in the massive increase in requests for one-person telephone booths for conversations, to the point where, that's becoming a standard offer in our designs, but exponentially growing when I look back even at just a few years ago. And I do see that densification and more desks and less activity space. And I think there's a few things and reasons why. I think the bit about the one-person pods is that I think during COVID, people technical capabilities increased, there was a big investment in technology, and Teams calls became much more common. So what we're getting feedback is that people are sitting at the desks just with their headsets on, doing Teams calls because they're collaborating with people who now aren't in the same offices, have been recruited all over the country. So the noise levels are going up in the open plan areas. And some people are okay with that, but some people need to get away, or they want the private conversations away from the desks. So those are just becoming invaluable. But we've also got a big push on the focus, and as more described, this sort of one person acoustic sort of baffle type pods where people need to get their head down. And I think that could also be a shift from having been working in isolation and have adapted to be working in a certain way. And I think there's definitely some research in here about the effect that COVID has had on acoustics and the way people are working and ability to focus. I think it has probably changed. And I think that's starting to come through in the design and layout of spaces and the products that people are tending to lean to, because I do think it's had to change on it.
That's great. Thanks. Great insights from you all. Appreciate your inputs there. And coming down to our last 20 minutes, so we want to keep the questions coming through and invite anything via the Zoom Q&A or if you're on LinkedIn Live. Maud, I think you were just about to head off to the next question we've had come through from Ian in the audience around accessibility, getting it right for the maximum amount of people. I know we've got some really passionate advocates and experts around that topic as well. Maud, do you want to kick off?
Yeah, I definitely saw the question before, by the way, which is my favorite question of all time, which is how do you measure productivity? I'm happy to reply about the other one, by the way. But how to measure productivity is my ultimate favorite question of all time, because how long is a piece of string? How long is a piece of string? So I adore this question. And I would say this is probably when I started to discuss the hybrid, I would say, if you don't know how are you productive as a person, and then even more importantly, what's your contribution to the team, then you don't know what productivity is. Your productivity, because you work 10 hours a day, you're actually less productive. You're doing a lot less work in a lot more time. So I think this question of productivity, I do adore it, because I think this is still what the leader wants. Every time you come up with a project, they say, is it going to make it more productive? I don't know. Will it be for you? Will it be for your team? I would have done my job well if I can tell you that I think this team is going to probably hit their goal faster, but I wouldn't say they're going to be more productive. I think it's really important to try to tailor this question to the team of the project, the clients, like Georgina said. What is your clients? Okay, what is their gap? What is their issue? And if they currently have to deliver 32 new products, I'm just saying good examples, or sell 25% more, the team leader should come up to say, this is how we normally do it to increase sale. But and again, I wouldn't know. Then I can come with them and say, it looks like you probably need this type of space, and probably the office is likely to be the right path. Or honestly, if it is about coding a new product online, it's probably likely that my space right now in my current lease doesn't allow for more spaces of focus like we were describing. So you probably should work from home. And I think this is this back and forth of like understanding. And I really insist on the productivity of an individual. So my productivity at home is gigantic. Or like Georgina said, if I can have a space where I'm completely focused, it's enormous. Like I can do 50 slides, 10,000 documents, and a guidebook. You know what I mean? Like amazing. My team productivity though, giant decrease, because I'm not here. I can't tell them what happened with the lease. So I think if it's important to look at productivity in those two ways and keep on having those conversations again within the team, and the workplace team should then have the discussion with the team leader to make sure that they always know what is the goals that they're trying to achieve, and so we can help them to achieve that. To me, that's how you would measure productivity, but it can't be a blank canvas. So I hope that wasn't too bad of me for saying productivity, but this is my absolute favorite topic.
That's great. That's great. Thanks, Maud. I'd love to know, Katelyn and Georgina, you've probably got some views around data to measure productivity, or how do you define productivity?
No, I was just going to say that that's so true, Maud. And I think certain teams, it might be easier, and I say productivity lightly, it might be easier to measure productivity because there are other data sources that you can tie to, like revenue generation or number of client visits or things like that. But productivity is such a broad word. And to your point, like what their productivity level is like one day may not be the same the next day. And that may not have any, space relation to it. It could be they had a bad day. So I think for us, data is, it's a valuable input, but we also need to keep the human lens on, right? Like that's also very valuable. And just level setting our expectations with, does this make sense? How if we took this data to employees or to leaders, what's the human lens that we need to add that the data doesn't tell us?
Yeah, I would probably add slightly different. We don't measure productivity, as government departments. Each department will have their own targets and measures, but what we measure is we'll work with Leesman on just workplace experience and satisfaction and comfort in the environment. And as government property agency, we see that giving everyone the perfect facility to deliver their job in the best way. So we would look in it, use satisfaction scores in that way rather than productivity to then drive change in our designs or drill into feedback about why someone isn't very happy in their workplace.
That's great. And kind of just segueing from that, Georgina, onto the next question around accessibility. And I know that's probably part of the data you're measuring as well as the inputs you're putting into a workspace.
Yes.
Perhaps you could kind of speak to the question. So the question was around comments on accessibility, getting it right for the maximum amount of people.
Yeah, it's just such an incredible, huge topic. So we would refer to it as inclusive design. In the GPA, we have inclusive design standards, which will reference British standards and regulations, handrails, carpet finishes, things like that. But it's much more than that sort of initial level. So for us, inclusive design, accessibility starts right from the project conception. Are we picking the right site? Is it well connected for transport, travel distances? Even sort of which cities we're investing in is a part of inclusive design right from the beginning. When we select our suppliers, our architects, our furniture suppliers, our contractors, we embed inclusive design questions into the tender. And when I'm looking at and scoring those, I'm saying, do these companies that we're wanting to work with actually understand what we mean by inclusive design? Or do they just think of it as terminology of, is there an accessible toilet that has a handrail in it? Or are they drilling into it much more? And so GPA want to work with people who have got that passion about inclusive design and suppliers. And, there's huge amounts of webinars and conferences looking at this topic. And so neurodiversity, probably even a few years ago, that term wasn't even really referenced, but now there is all sorts of guidance around neurodiversity. And it's a really big topic about understanding your workforce and what they actually might need. There are certain job roles where people with certain levels of neurodivergence would gravitate to, and that will dictate, do you need more quiet space or focus space? So it does sort of blend into some of the other topics we've been talking about, is that, inclusive design comes into all elements of your project. But I think a big thing I would like people to think about is having an inclusive design strategy for your organization that is in place. So for us, we haven't had one. GPA was only formed in 2018. We've had inclusive design standards, and you can see our government workplace design guide is available online. It's a document that anyone can access, and it references a lot of technical data. But the inclusive design strategy that we're doing now is trying to embed it as just a key principle in projects. So it's not getting cut from budgets. When we're trying to push sort of leading edge design in inclusivity, it's not something that can be just looked at and value engineered out to get your budget down. And there is also some really good guidance around what an inclusive design strategy should be, and that's online. And it really is about people and leadership first, and getting that right in your project, all the way through to, you know, the detail in the project where you are talking about looking at sensory experiences and mapping out your workplaces. Where is noisy? Where are the smells? You know, what are the fabrics that you're using? It has to be really holistic and encompassing for the whole delivery.
I guess going back to kind of the original point we started with, those kind of the initial project vision and then those employee resource groups. Could you share a bit around how you've engaged with user groups to embed and to kind of get an understanding of the, I guess, a day in the life, you know, all the different fine interactions that everyone has with the building and with the environment?
Absolutely. So, I mean, we'll talk about Leesman's survey, and, you know, we'll do post surveys and sort of pre-surveys and then post surveys, and we'll drill into that data. But what we've actually done is add some new question sets in which reference inclusive design specifically, and working with Leesman also to identify that if people would like to voluntarily say if they have a disability or a neurodivergence, what that is, so that we can pull that data out, and that is anonymous. And we do see some really different trends when you filter the data differently by people who identify with that. We sort of can't contact those you don't know, it is anonymous. But what we'll do is we'll have a user group. So the Civil Service, UK Civil Service Disability Network, will, you know, get people to come out and test the building. We work with RNIB, so Institute for the Blind. They will get people come out and they will give you feedback on your buildings, and just live it and walk it, which is absolutely invaluable. But a big thing for us is actually sitting down with people once they've moved in and getting the feedback from how it's been. So we'll set up community groups for each building. We have a really strong customer experience and workplace team who will drive that. So once our capital project's closed and I'm on to the next one, they will continue that and keep gathering the feedback to make improvements in the projects. That's
great. Katelyn and Maud, I'd love to hear your thoughts around inclusive design or designing for accessibility.
Yeah, I will say this is pretty close to my heart. I had a stepbrother who is disabled. And so kind of coming at it through the lens of it's not just doing what's compliant, but it's doing what's right. That's kind of our strategy, if you will, Georgina, is having that lens on. But to your point, you need leadership support to prioritize that in a build, because it very quickly becomes something that wants to easily get beat out. And that has to be a part of the goal and strategy for the project, is to prioritize accessibility and universal design. And I think accessibility has adapted, right? It's not just physical accessibility, as Georgina said. It's now about neurodiversity and understanding how employees with different needs need to leverage different spaces differently. So we have a group called Access Indeed at Indeed, which is an inclusion resource group. And we partner very closely with them on understanding, you know, what pain points have they heard, do they feel, and how we can continue to adapt our standards. So we have a list of about 21 what I call settings, but they're, you know, line itemed into our builds of what we need to do to provide Indeed level of accessibility. And we're continually looking to adapt and expand those, again, with this lens of it's not just doing what's compliant, but doing what's right for our employees, and continuing to adapt in our spaces to meet the needs of the majority.
Maybe just to mention, because I think the girls have said it quite well as well. What's interesting is that compliancy piece. Maybe in the UK we are actually quite good. We have some compliancy staff that actually are making a lot of positive changes in the workplace. In some other countries, it will be zero. So you will literally not have to do anything. So you're right, Katelyn. I think doing the right thing is important. After that, again, having that buy-in from the leadership sometimes comes down to budget. So you realize that, okay, we need to change all of our fire doors. God knows how, we all know how much these are. There's always a budget into this because effectively somebody could, yes, they could come into the office, they could use the lift and they could kind of come, but they can't go to the toilet by themselves because somebody will have to push the door open. And you kind of like, what? That's terrible, right? So having those employee resource group or a company that could come and help, and there are many that are so welcoming this kind of partnership and feedback, I think is important. I think at the end of the day, what's always I don't particularly speak for GWI. I think in general, when I was working with different clients before, that was the same kind of like, oh yeah, but at the moment we don't have whatever the neurodiversity or diversity issue could have been. And so that's always the chicken and egg, because you're like, well, maybe that's why you don't have. It's because nobody could effectively come if they were blind or if they were non-hearing or difficulty to hear. So it is always interesting to kind of have to do exactly the same as we discussed for our project, but with disability for everything. You have to come back, make sure that there's a no-brainer kind of moment in the leadership team to say, of course we need to do this. Why would we not do this? You now have almost everywhere height adjustable desks. Why would you not have a room for, quietness and kind of calm and audio pieces and guidance for manager to welcome an employee that has such and such disability? I think it gets really hard. Of course, let's not be crazy here. I think it get hard for a manager to then absorb all of this and try to then absorb there as a team. But the girls have said it right. I think if you could kind of have some sponsors from the leadership and then some external or internal with your employees group, I think you're probably already on a right track.
Yeah, that's very interesting, Maud. It comes like a few client project situations we've had. I remember someone in our showroom in London saying to us, well, no, we don't have a need for that product because we don't have any wheelchair users in our team. And it kind of made us wince at the time because, as you say, that might be a good reason why you haven't. But someone saying to me the other day as well, in terms of what we've said, these different settings, providing spaces as we get more and more people into the workplace with a diagnosis in terms of neurodivergence and the different accessibility, inclusivity needs. Someone said to me the other day, if we talk about VE in these areas, we've already failed. And I thought that was quite telling, that this something, as Katelyn said, this has got to be a light on the hill. It's got to be a beacon, a guiding light on a project. Is what standard are we going for? I think, Georgina, you've done a lot of work on this in GPA. What would you say for someone just starting out on the inclusive design journey? What would you say is the quickest win, the best place to start to immerse yourself in it? Because I think there's a lot of clients out there who are just seeing this rise in terms of neurodivergence and starting to cater for it. But I think there's a big scale out there of people who are familiar with it.
Yeah, I don't think you need to start, paying for accessibility audits and things like that, although you can do. Doing something like an accessibility audit will very starkly show on paper, what is failing. But I think upskilling and just general awareness of it is quite easy. There's really good British standards out there, like BS 8300 is, just a Bible, and it's available to anyone. There's also an accessibility audit book if you're in the UK that produced by the RIBA, which literally gives you checklists of areas to look at in your spaces, and you can just work through and have a look. Access is always going to be such a huge one, because although people just think, accessibility is about ramps, like that's your first fall into the first hurdle if people can't get into a building. So when we're talking about that customer journey or mapping through your building, what is the mapping journey that people need to get to key spaces in the building? So a big principle for us is all circulation routes are automated. So it's not just the first entrance onto the floor plate, it's everywhere across the buildings. And sometimes people are shocked at that and the level of cost that it takes to do it. But that is just a red line for us, that everywhere has to be accessible in the building. And it's not just wheelchair, it's looking at it from all sorts of levels of physical ability. Even if, it's not just someone in a wheelchair, someone might have broke their leg and be in a cast just for a few weeks. So are you excluding that person from coming to work, or are you actually making it accessible for everybody?
Yeah, that's
That's
very,
great.
very interesting. And we've had that. It's not just about, as you say, wheelchair. It's about someone who's less dexterous, might be more sensitive to
Yeah.
noise, might need those different textures and colours. So yeah, I'm conscious of time, Alex.
Yeah, I was just going to butt in and say it's been a great conversation. Unfortunately, we're right at time now, so we're going to have to draw it to a pause or perhaps to a close right now. It was an interesting point that was made around the whole neurodiverse topic. I heard a client talking the other day about neuroaesthetics, which was a new word to me. Just kind of the thinking around how we can design to a variety of diverse needs. So with that being said, we'd love to really thank our panelists, Katelyn, Maud, Georgina. Thank you so much for joining us, sharing your experience and insights. Really appreciate it. And thanks to the audience for joining us. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day. And also, this recording will be on the Space Store website within the next 24 hours, spacestore.com/insights.